Hi, I'm Dr. Chibugo. Welcome to Medical Mysteries, where I tell you fascinating and sometimes horrifying stories from the history of medicine. Today, my story is both sad and interesting. So, imagine you lived in the medieval times and medicine was full of superstition and religion, and a new disease comes into town. Just imagine how terrified you would be not knowing what is going on. I think we all had that experience with COVID 19, even with all the medical advancements that we had. But COVID 19 is not what I want to tell you about today. Today, we're talking about syphilis, which was a pandemic of its own time. It terrified people, it caused blames to go around finger pointing, and so many other things when the disease was first discovered. Now, the story of syphilis is started in a cloud of confusion and finger pointing, like I said before. Let me paint you a picture. The year is 1493, and Christopher Columbus, whom I'm sure we've all heard about, he explored new worlds. He comes back with his crew, and according to a lot of prominent theory and literature, they brought back something more than spices and gold. They came back with a silent and invisible enemy that stowed away on their ship. And within 2 years of their return, the disease exploded with a loud bang. The first major syphilis outbreak in Europe occurred between 1494 and 1495 during the French invasion of Nepal. The French troops that were invading Nepal, Italy at that time, they were the first documented syphilis victims. Their bodies were covered with festering sores, their skin was peeling, their faces were disfigured and distorted. However, nobody knew the cause of this new disease, where it came from. So it became a global game of blame. It's your fault, it's your fault. The Italians said it was the French and they called it the French disease. The French said no, it's the Italians and they called it the Neapolitan disease. So everybody blamed everyone. However, it's important to point out that Christopher Columbus was Italian and most of his crew were also Italian. Also, recent genetic and archaeological evidence they confirmed that syphilis originated from the Americas, which was where the Christopher Columbus and his crew came back from, likely around 9,000 years ago. Research analyzed skeletons and DNA of pre-Columbian people, and they found clear signs of Treponema pallidum, which is the bacterium that causes syphilis. So when Christopher Columbus returned from Europe in the late 15th century, his crew unknowingly came back with the disease. From the very first outbreak of syphilis, many people suspected that it was sexually transmitted because the symptoms appeared on the genitals and the disease spread more among the soldiers and the sex workers. But medicine at that time, like I said, it was steeped in superstition and religion. Some people believed that it was divine punishment for what they were doing, but it didn't cause them to stop, Sha. And others believed that it was because of bad air. But by the 1700s, the physicians, doctors, they started documenting how the diseases were transmitted between sexual partners, but they were not able to specifically identify the mode of sexual transmission. They just termed it a venereal disease. So although they knew it was sexually transmitted, they were not sure how exactly it was transmitted through sex. But whatever they called it at that time, syphilis, it was a nightmare. Everybody was afraid. Nobody wanted to get it. It was like a wolf in sheep's clothing because it will start as a small thing. You just have a small sore or a boil. Afterwards, your whole body becomes covered with rashes. You would get fever. You would have swollen glands. And if you leave the disease to progress, it would slowly consume your body. You would become mad. It can cause blindness. And ultimately, it led to the death of a lot of people. One thing that really baffled doctors about syphilis was that it was really good at mimicking other diseases. So they called it the Great Imitator. For over 400 years, humanity was at the mercy of syphilis. So eventually, doctors tried to come up with different types of treatment for the disease. The treatments that they came up with initially were very horrifying, very painful, and deadly. In fact, deadlier than the disease itself. The very first treatment they attempted was mercury, which We later knew that mercury is very, very toxic to the human body. Many people died from the treatment with mercury faster than they died from the syphilis itself. Well, sorry to them, but like I said, medical history is steeped with a lot of horrifying stories. So imagine yourself, you're desperate for a cure, you go to the doctor and they tell you, oh, we have a chamber, or we have a pill that you can swallow, or we have a cream that you can rub on your skin. And those things were all made of mercury. So they call the disease one night with Venice, a lifetime with mercury. The Venice here referring to the sex workers, and the mercury referring to the treatment that you take when you get syphilis. And people usually started sweating and salivating after they give them mercury. They thought that it was the disease purging itself, but it was actually people experiencing mercury toxicity. However, the story took a dramatic turn by the 20th century when medicine had advanced a bit. There were microscopes. So in 1905, two German scientists, Fritz Schrodin and Erich Hoffmann, they made a landmark discovery. So they used dark field microscope. They took scrapes of the infection from the people's skin and they looked at it under the microscope and they saw a corkscrew-shaped bacterium that they called Treponema pallidum. So that was when the cause of syphilis was discovered. And that was how they were now able to discover how exactly it was transmitted through sexual contact. So from then on, the chase was on. So a few years later, another scientist named Paul Ehrlich, he decided that he was going to find a magic cure. He called it a magic bullet, a chemical component that you just had to take and it will cure you without killing you. Because remember, mercury was killing people. So he developed what a drug called salvarsan. It was an antimicrobial drug, but the wrong thing about it was that it was made of arsenic. And arsenic is also poisonous to the human body. In 1928, Alexander Fleming, who was also a scientist, by accident discovered penicillin, which was made by a mold. But it wasn't until the 1940s that researchers were able to figure out how exactly to purify penicillin, mass produce it, and get it tested against syphilis. So the results were just miraculous. The terror of syphilis was eventually broken because you now had a curable single shot of medication. So there were no more chambers, no more arsenic, no more mercury, just an injection, and the disease was gone. So that was the true magic bullet of the disease. But with all the excitement and the good thing that happened, there were a lot of tragic stories that surrounded syphilis. Just as medicine is about triumph, there were also a lot of medical malpractice that happened. In 1932, the US Public Health Service they began a study in Tuskegee, Alabama, on 100 black men who had syphilis. And the goal was to observe the full and natural progression of the disease from the beginning to the end. So for 40 years, from 1932 to 1972, these men, they were left deliberately untreated. Even as, after the penicillin had been discovered and it was shown to be a safe and effective cure, they were denied treatment. They lied to them and they told them they were just receiving free health care for bad blood while their bodies were slowly dying because of syphilis. They went blind, they went mad, they died. Like it wasn't medicine, it was pure exploitation. And it's a painful reminder that science without ethics can be very terrifying. So, what's the lesson that we learned here? Syphilis isn't just a disease, right? It is a story of shame, a story of science and survival. It reminds us that medicine is more than pills and microscopes. It's about people, it's about listening, it's about learning. And above all, it's about never letting history repeat itself. Today, we are grateful for a cure. We are grateful for being able to pass through without much harm, but a lot of people died for that to be available. Now, here are some fascinating facts that you can drop for your friends. Did you know that the name syphilis came from a poem? An Italian physician in 1530 wrote a poem about a cursed shepherd called Syphilis. And get this, in 1927, an Austrian psychiatrist won a Nobel Prize for treating neurosyphilis by intentionally infecting people with malaria. So the high fever from the malaria infection would kill the bacteria that caused syphilis, and then he would give people quinine for the treatment of malaria. This was what they were using to cure malaria before penicillin became a thing. So it was a bizarre treatment, but it worked and it was dangerous. So with that, I think we have come to the end of the story of syphilis, how it came about, and its cure. I hope you learned something today, and thank you for joining me on this journey through the medical history. Be sure to tune in next week as we uncover more secrets. Bye.